Welcome to Farming Aid. When you think of cattle farming, chances are you picture Angus or Hereford herds grazing in open pastures. But what if I told you that one of North America's most iconic wild animals, the American bison, is quietly making a comeback, not just in the wild, but in modern farming? That's right. This legendary beast, once hunted to near extinction, is now being raised on ranches across the country as part of a surprising and powerful movement in sustainable agriculture. From leaner meat to land-friendly grazing habits, the bison is proving it has more to offer than just its historic legacy. In this video, we're diving deep into the untold story of how the American bison is finding new life in today's cattle industry, and why forward-thinking farmers are turning to this ancient animal to shape the future of livestock farming. This isn't just about saving a species. It's about redefining the way we raise animals for food. The tale begins with tragedy and near extinction. By the late 1800s, commercial hunting, government campaigns to weaken Native American tribes, and habitat loss had decimated the bison population from an estimated 30 to 60 million down to fewer than 1,000 animals. These survivors were scattered across remote pockets of wilderness and a handful of private ranches. It was a dark time for the species, and for a while, extinction seemed inevitable. But a small group of conservationists and forward-thinking ranchers stepped in. They began breeding programs, often crossing bison with domestic cattle in desperate attempts to preserve some genetic link to the wild. What started as an act of survival would eventually lead to something bigger, a unique fusion between wild resilience and modern farming techniques. Today, the American bison is no longer on the brink. In fact, its numbers have rebounded to over 500,000 animals, most of which now live on private lands managed for meat production or conservation purposes. And while that might not sound like much compared to traditional cattle populations, the bison's role in modern agriculture is more important than ever. These animals are not just surviving. They're thriving in a system once dominated solely by cattle. And they're offering solutions to problems that are becoming increasingly urgent: climate change, overgrazing, disease resistance, and the growing demand for leaner, healthier meat. One of the main reasons bison have been welcomed into modern cattle farming is their remarkable hardiness. Bison are evolution's response to centuries of harsh winters, droughts, predators, and open plains. They require less human intervention compared to traditional cattle. Their thick hides protect them in freezing temperatures, and their ability to forage on poor-quality grasses means they can survive where many breeds of cattle would struggle. This makes bison particularly attractive to farmers operating in marginal or degraded rangelands. With input costs rising, especially for feed and veterinary care, bison offer a low-maintenance alternative that fits well with regenerative and rotational grazing systems. But the shift isn't just about survival or cost saving. There's also growing interest in the meat itself. Bison meat is often marketed as the healthier, more ethical choice. It's lower in fat and cholesterol than beef and high in protein, iron, and omega-3s. For health-conscious consumers and those looking to reduce their environmental footprint, bison is becoming a premium product. This has allowed farmers to sell bison meat at higher prices, with demand consistently outpacing supply. Restaurants, especially in eco-forward cities and tourist regions, are putting bison burgers and steaks on menus as both a novelty and a nod to heritage food systems. Behind the scenes, ranchers are discovering something else that makes bison stand out. They play an important role in grassland ecosystem restoration. Bison graze differently than cattle. Their feeding patterns are less destructive to native prairie grasses, and their hooves naturally aerate the soil. They tend to roam more, preventing overgrazing in one area and allowing vegetation to recover. These behaviors make them ideal for regenerative grazing models, where the goal is not just to raise animals, but to rebuild the land. In fact, some environmental scientists argue that bringing bison back onto the land is one of the best ways to heal North America's degraded grasslands, much of which has been exhausted by decades of overgrazing and monoculture farming. This ecological benefit has inspired a new generation of farmers, many of them first-timers or people switching from traditional cattle to invest in bison operations. The industry may still be small, but it's growing steadily. Organizations like the National Bison Association have worked to support these ranchers with training, market development, and genetic research. They've also helped change public perception, framing bison not just as wild relics of the past, but as livestock of the future. This shift in mindset has been crucial. Bison are not domesticated in the same way cattle are. They remain wild at heart, often unpredictable and harder to handle. They don't tolerate crowding or confinement well, and they can leap fences and charge with little warning. But with proper management techniques, larger paddocks, minimal handling, and stress-free environments, farmers are learning how to work with, not against, the bison's natural instincts. Some are even going further by exploring crossbreeding experiments again, this time with a more careful and science-based approach. These hybrid animals, known as beefalo, are designed to combine the meat quality, disease resistance, and low-fat traits of bison with the calmer temperament and fast growth rate of cattle. The beefalo concept has been controversial in some circles, especially among purists who want to preserve the genetic purity of the bison. But others see it as a practical solution for farmers who want the best of both worlds, a more adaptable, profitable, and sustainable meat animal that fits into existing cattle infrastructure. The debate continues, but it highlights just how much the American bison has become part of the livestock conversation in ways few could have imagined a century ago. Cultural attitudes are also shifting. In recent years, there's been a broader push to decolonize food systems and recognize the role indigenous communities have played in stewarding animals like the bison. Many Native American tribes, who see the bison as a sacred symbol and a central part of their history, are leading the charge in bison restoration. Tribal herds are not just about economics or conservation. They're about cultural healing and sovereignty. These herds are often managed differently, with a focus on holistic land management and traditional knowledge. Some tribes are even reintroducing bison into ancestral lands that haven't seen them in generations. And in doing so, they're reshaping the story of livestock farming itself, connecting it to deeper values of balance, respect, and relationship with the land. For modern farmers, learning from these approaches could be transformative. While industrial beef operations focus on scale, control, and uniformity, bison ranching pushes in the opposite direction, toward flexibility, biodiversity, and ecological alignment. It's not always easy. Bison aren't as easy to raise or manage as cattle. They don't respond well to stress or confinement. Calving can be unpredictable, and bison herds require different fencing and handling systems. But for those willing to make the shift, the rewards go beyond economics. There's a certain satisfaction that comes from working with an animal that represents wildness, resilience, and survival. And there's a growing recognition that the old way, our current industrial food system, needs alternatives that honor both the land and the animals we rely on. As climate change continues to challenge the livestock sector with more heat waves, water shortages, and feed scarcity, animals like the bison may prove to be more than a novelty. They might be a necessity. Their ability to thrive in extreme conditions, require fewer resources, and contribute positively to the land makes them an asset for future farming models. Already, some ranchers are integrating bison into mixed-species grazing systems alongside cattle, sheep, or goats to improve pasture use and reduce disease cycles. Others are shifting entirely to bison operations to take advantage of the rising demand for game meats and the lower long-term management costs. And consumers, increasingly educated and concerned about where their food comes from, are showing a willingness to support these efforts with their wallets. Of course, challenges remain. Processing infrastructure for bison is limited compared to beef. Marketing channels are still developing, and regulations can sometimes get in the way of innovation. But momentum is building. More universities are studying bison biology and nutrition. More chefs are highlighting bison meat on their menus. And more people, both urban and rural, are discovering that the story of the American bison is not just one of survival, but of revival. So, the next time someone asks you about the future of livestock farming, you might want to point them toward the past. toward a creature that once roamed free and nearly disappeared, toward the American bison, whose return is reshaping how we think about food, land, and resilience. This animal, so deeply tied to the identity of the continent, is showing us that sometimes the most revolutionary farming ideas don't come from laboratories or tech startups, but from the ground beneath our feet and the animals that once called it home. The American bison isn't just a relic of a bygone era. In many ways, it's a pioneer of a new agricultural frontier, one that values sustainability, respects nature, and offers a healthier, more balanced path forward for farmers and eaters alike. If you found this story eye-opening, hit the like button, share it with someone who loves farming or nature, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the animals shaping the future of agriculture. The bison's story isn't over, and neither is ours.